Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, 2019 versus 2020 MIPS Program Requirements. All lines have been muted. The webinar will last 1 hour, and we will have dedicated time after the presentation for Q&A. If you have questions throughout, simply type them in the chat window, and we will address them during the Q&A time. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for download on the iCare Leaders website by next week. Our speaker for today is Megan Fries. Megan is a Senior MIPS Assurance Specialist here at iCare Leaders. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. At this time, I will turn the webinar over to Megan.
Hello, everybody. As she mentioned, my name is Megan Fries. I'm a Senior MIPS Assurance Specialist at iCare Leaders. MIPS Assurance is the department that deals with all things MIPS, and we can be hired for practices to help specific practices with their issues. So today we're going to be talking about the 2019 versus 2020 program rule changes, and also we'll be talking about changes due to COVID-19 as well, the most recent changes that have taken place. We're going to be talking about the financial impacts, although the changes because of COVID-19 have changed that part of the presentation a little bit. It's a little more up in the air. And then we're going to be getting into a category drill down, what's different, what remains the same within each category. And then also we're going to go over the RCP dashboard functionality, how to set it up for 2020 and make sure that you know exactly what you need to do in order to see how well you're doing in the PI category for MIPS this year. And then also we're going to talk about MIPS assurance a little bit at the end, and then there will be plenty of time for questions and answer session as well. All right, so let's get started with COVID-19. There's been a few changes. So CMS has made some changes retroactively for 2019, and they've also made some changes to 2020 as well. So retroactively for 2019, they've changed the attestation deadline. They've extended it through April 30th of 2020. So normally attestation takes place between January 1st and it stops in March 31st, but now they've extended it by an entire month. Expectation here is that that is also going to push back when we receive our final scores for 2019. Typically we see those sometime in June. You can go to qpp.cms.gov. If you've got a HARP ID, and you can log in there to see your final scores. Typically those become available right around June, but expect that to probably push into July, maybe even August, depending on staffing issues due to COVID-19 at CMS. So hopefully they'll have those out as soon as possible, but the scoring is going to be pushed back by at least a month, so we can tell that the finalized scores will probably be pushed back by at least a month as well. The second change that they made retroactively for 2019 is kind of a big one. Anybody who does not attest for 2019, that TIN will automatically receive a neutral payment adjustment. This is coming under the extreme and uncontrollable circumstances hardship. We've seen this hardship in the past that's been applied automatically for natural disasters such as hurricanes and things like that. They're also applying it to the COVID-19 situation. So any provider who does not complete attestation for 2019 will automatically receive a neutral payment adjustment. Now, for those of you guys who have already completed your attestations and you didn't meet the requirements, at this point, you're going to be earning a negative penalty. Now is the time. You have until April 30th to get onto those submission sites and take back your submission. Because if you don't attest any information and you were going to receive a negative adjustment, you know, that's going to be a neutral payment adjustment if you have just no information. Also, alternatively, if you were paying attention and you received a bonus, or you were expecting to receive a bonus, this is going to affect that bonus. We're going to talk about that in the next slide a little bit. We'll talk about how that affects the bonuses that are going to be coming out for 2019 to be paid out in 2021. Changes to 2020 looking forward. So CMS has said that they are not going to use Q1 or Q2 data for scoring purposes for the quality category in 2020. So it's the only category that kind of doesn't sort of fix itself, so to speak. The PI category, promoting interoperability, and improvement activity categories are both 90-day reporting periods again this year. So you can just select a 90-day reporting period that works for you that doesn't include any of this kind of sort of tumultuous time during COVID-19. So those two categories sort of fix themselves automatically, as does cost, because we're dealing with episodic measures, and episodic measures usually mean surgeries, and they're usually elective surgeries or surgeries that are non-urgent when we're dealing with the episodic cost measures. So, you know, that kind of fixes itself as well, because we're not doing surgeries right now, or at least most of us aren't. So the only category that has a year reporting period that isn't going to kind of fix itself in this situation is going to be quality. So they're specifically not going to be looking at Q1 or Q2 data for 2020. So you can expect your quality data to start counting on June 1st. Okay, so that's a biggie. So how does this affect your bonus? Well, we had some predictive statistics that came out, I believe, in November of last year. CMS had mentioned that they were expecting to save $390 million in negative adjustments that they were going to then pay forward into the positive adjustments. We can expect that number to be a lot lower probably, and simply because the providers who aren't going to attest are the ones that are probably not paying attention, and or the providers who are paying enough attention to know that they weren't going to meet the requirements, and so they just aren't going to attest anyway, and they're taking the negative adjustment. So probably those people weren't going to attest anyway, and now instead of getting a negative adjustment because of the extreme and uncontrollable circumstances hardship that's automatically applied, they'll now be receiving a neutral payment adjustment instead. So they won't be paying, so to speak, paying into the system for the budget neutrality. So CMS said when they were expecting to save $390 million due to the 7% decrease on the negative penalties, they were expecting that the upper bonuses were going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.99%. That's not going to be true anymore, probably. Although CMS hasn't published any new numbers, so we don't really know what these numbers are going to change to. We can probably, you know, we can all logically think about this and realize that 4.99% is probably not going to be accurate. In fact, I think a couple of weeks ago they had even, or maybe even a month or two ago, they had changed that number to 4.69% anyway. It was a little bit lower the last time I checked, but either way, it's going to be a lot lower. It's probably going to keep going lower. The good news is that there's still $500 million out there. Congress sets aside $500 million for exceptional earners, right? And anybody who received a score or earned a score of 75 points or more in 2019 gets a piece of that $500 million pie that's out there. That is safe. That is outside the budget neutrality of the system. So in other words, it's not money that is saved from people getting negative adjustments. It is money that is set aside at the beginning of every year to be paid to those people who are the exceptional earners. So if you have 75 points or more, you're still going to get a bonus. So it will just probably be a lot less than we were expecting, right? Okay, so now we're going to get into what I had planned a month ago to put in this presentation. So a side-by-side comparison of 2019 versus 2020. So the maximum negative penalty in 2019 was going to be 7%. Or is 7%, continues to be. In 2020, it's going to be 9%. Okay, so in 2020, depending on what you do in 2020, if you do not meet the requirements, which on the next line says 45 points, if you don't get 45 points or more, then you're going to receive a negative penalty for 9%, negative 9% in 2022. Okay. So the minimum to avoid the negative penalty in 2019 was 30, and it's now gone up to 45, so it's up by 15 points. So pay attention to that. We're getting closer and closer to 50% there. The exceptional earners threshold in 2019, like I was mentioning, was 75 points. And in 2020, it's now raised up to 85 points. So in order to get a piece of that $500 million pie, again, you have to have 85 points in 2020. Your data completeness requirement for quality was 65% in 2019. It's now raised 5 points to 70. So you're going to have to make sure that 70% of your records are present in the data when you attest to your quality information. The adjusted upper limit, again, was supposed to be 4.99%, although it was 4.69%. Again, they had just recently changed it in 2019, and then they had expected it to be 6.25% in 2020. So at this point, we don't have any reason to believe that 2020 will be less than that, although, you know, if things get worse and the pandemic continues and it gets worse, then we can probably start to expect that the bonuses in 2020 will be a little bit less as well. But for 2019, they had originally quoted 4.99%. That's going to be less. And now in 2020, they're expecting 6.25, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so those two numbers were not written in stone. Obviously, they have changed. So in 2019, the minimum quality points for not meeting the data completeness, meaning that if you have a quality measure where you have 19 or fewer patients in the denominator, okay, then you could earn the minimum amount of points. For large practices, that was 1 point. It's now 0. So large practices are considered offices that have 16 or 16 or more providers. So any practice that is considered a large practice, you will not receive any points for any quality measures that have 19 or fewer patients in the denominator. If you're a small practice, 15 or fewer providers, then you're still going to continue to get at least 3 points for trying the measure, even if you have 19 or fewer patients. But if you have 20 or more patients for either small or large practice, you can receive whatever your performance rate gets you based on the benchmarks. So, you know, that's different for every measure. So you'd have to look at the benchmarks for those. Those are published for 2020. Verify opioid treatment agreement bonus. You used to get 5 points. You don't get any bonuses any longer for the opioid treatment agreement. The episodic cost measures, there used to be 10 measures, there are now 20. There are no new ophthalmic measures and none on the horizon. We'll talk about that more too. For improvement activity reporting periods, they addressed this issue retroactively for 2019, so it doesn't technically change, but I did want to mention it. You can have separate reporting periods. So for a small practice, you have to do either 1 high priority measure or 2 medium weight activities. Or if you're a large practice, you have to do 2 high, 4 medium, or you have to do a combination of 1 high and 2 medium. So if you have multiple improvement activities, you can choose to have them on separate 90-day reporting periods. They do not have to take place on the same 90-day reporting period. When you go to attest that information, you would just attest the first day of the first activity all the way through the last day of the last activity. Okay, so they don't have to overlap. They don't have to be in the same 90-day reporting period. It can be 2 completely different activities during 2 completely different time frames. But the first day that you would attest to it would be the first day that you started the first one and all the way through the end of the last day of the last measure that you did when you go to attest. And then just make sure your documentation has the correct 90 days for each of those measures. Okay, documentation is key there. If you're audited, you have to be able to prove that you did activities for 90 days for the reporting period. And then another big change for improvement activities this year is physician involvement. For groups, you used to just have to have 1 provider doing the improvement activity, and that gave everybody in the group credit all the way up until last year. This year, 50% of your providers have to participate in the improvement activity or you will not get credit. So if you have a practice with 2 providers, you're still fine. If you have a practice with 3 providers, 2 of them have to do it, and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind as well. Also, some other random things that are still available for 2020 is the PI hardship is still available for small practices. So that's a nice hardship if you have trouble getting the correct information from your EHR's reports, or you just have some major issues that were happening with the workflows and you weren't able to meet the requirements of PI. If you're a small practice, again, 15 or fewer providers, then you can apply for a PI hardship that is separate from the extreme and uncontrollable circumstances hardship. The extreme and uncontrollable circumstances can be done for any or all of the categories. The PI hardship is specifically for PI, and it does not mean that you automatically get a neutral payment adjustment. If you do a PI hardship, those 25 points go into your quality category. So instead of being worth 40 points, it would be worth 70. So your small practice quality lowest score is still 3, so that's still something that is that's good for small practices. The prescription drug monitoring program is still optional for 2020. They had mentioned that they were going to make it mandatory for 2020. It is still optional. I believe Missouri is the holdout. Parts of Missouri have PDMP, but not the whole state. So it is still optional this year. Expect that it will be required next year for registration. So keep that in mind. You can still get bonus points for that. You can't get it for the agreement anymore, the opioid agreement, but you can still get 5 bonus points towards your PI score for using PDMP this year, doing it a year early. It's also an improvement activity as well. So if you're doing it, you may want to do that. That's a medium weight activity. Quality is still worth 45 points and cost is still worth 20. They had talked about doing a 40-20 split on quality and cost, but in 2020 they're doing 45-15 again. And then opt-in is still available for submission. Opt-in is where if a provider doesn't meet all of the requirements to be an eligible MIPS physician or provider, then if you meet 2 of the 3 criteria, you can opt in and you can attest and earn a bonus. Before opt-in became available last year, and before that, if you sent your information in and they determined that you were ineligible, you would get a score, but you wouldn't get a bonus if you had earned one. But now with opt-in, if you get a score and you've earned a bonus, you can opt in when you submit on the QPP webpage, and then you can get a bonus. You can actually earn your bonus. Be careful though, because you can also earn the negative decrease. So just be careful. Just make sure if you're going to opt in, make sure you know that you've met the requirements for bonus. Again, 2020, you have to have 45 points in order to avoid the negative penalty. All right, so let's dive a little deeper into the individual categories. Quality is the category that's worth the most of your MIPS score at 45%. CMS has published the 2020 Clinical Quality Measure Specification Release Notes. It's a really good document. If you search for that document, it will go through every single measure and what has happened to it. So whether the numerator criteria or the denominator criteria has changed, or if the CPT codes have changed, the ICD-10 codes, or any changes that were made to it. It doesn't specify what those changes are, so it's a little weird. It is release notes, but it will give you an indicator. It will say, QPP 191, numerator criteria has changed. So then you can go look at the specifications for that measure and find out what has changed with the numerator for that measure. So it's a really nice document to take a peek at if you're looking for specifically what has changed with the measures and you don't want to go measure by measure, looking at the specifications and wasting a bunch of time. There are benchmark differences between claims versus registry. There always have been, but claims is being phased out. Expect that claims will be unavailable as a way to report your quality measures I don't know how soon that's going to happen, but it is going to be happening very soon, maybe next year or the year after. But because they're phasing it out, they're making claims almost worthless. For small practices, you still get that small 3 point for claims measure, so you'll never get anything lower than 3 points for a measure. But for larger practices, the benchmarks are just bonkers on some measures, like really, really low, like one point or 2 points. They're way lower than registry. So in other words, if you had 95% for a measure, if you did it via claims, if you sent your claims information, same exact numerator, denominator, got 95% for claims and 95% for registry, you would get more points just because you're submitting that information via a registry versus submitting that information via claims. So keep that in mind. If there's anybody still on claims-based, you need to make preparations to move off of claims. If you're an optometry office or another specialty office that does not have a registry that's available to you, like IRIS is available to ophthalmologists, FigMD, which is the company that it's a third-party registry company that provides the interface essentially for IRIS registry for ophthalmology. They have a non-specialty registry called Polaris. Okay, it does cost something. There's a particular cost. I think it's something in the neighborhood of $400 per doctor per year. It's definitely worth it if you do not have a registry right now and you cannot sign up for IRIS. Definitely worth it to check out Polaris. You can register for it now. If you just, I believe it's polaris.figmd.com. So that is the non-specialty registry. As far as specific benchmark changes, we're looking at QPP 191, which is the 20/40 or better visual acuity measure, and the I'm sorry. That should be 192. QPP 192, excuse me, is the 30 days, going back to the OR 30 days following cataract surgery. So I apologize, this is the wrong measure. It should be QPP 192. This measure is still available. So the QPP 192 is going back to the ER within 30 days following cataract surgery for retained lens fragment or dislocated lens, something like that. That one is gone. And also QPP 388, which is unplanned vitrectomy. That first came on the scene on IRIS last year, so it came and went. Those both have been removed for 2020. So I apologize about this. This is the wrong measure. The next one down is the one. QPP 14, which is the ARMD measure, and QPP 130, which is the documentation of current meds, are capped at 7 points. So those measures, if you're doing them through a registry, I'm not talking about the benchmarks for claims because it's so worthless. It's almost better to just not even do anything for claims because you get barely any points anymore. But these are the benchmarks for registry. But the QPP 192 and QPP 388 are also removed from claims-based reporting as well. And then there are lots more measures without an 8th or a 9th decile. So pay close attention. There are no ophthalmic measures that you can earn 9 points on anymore. They don't exist on IRIS registry anyhow. So if you are reporting, you'll get to the 8th decile, means you can earn 8 points for 99.99% performance rate. And then if you earn 100, then you skip all the way to 10. So you cannot earn 9. And in some cases, especially the ones that are capped, you cannot earn 8 points either. So be careful. Take a look at your measures. Download the benchmarks. Take a look at that and see which measures are worth your time. There's a measure, QPP 389, which is another cataract surgery measure, plan versus final refraction. It's going to be a pain to map, but it's definitely a measure that you need to pay attention to. Since they're not going to be looking at your quality data until Q3, which is June 1st, you have time to implement any measures that you're not currently doing. So take this time now to download the 2020 Clinical Quality Measure Specification Release Notes, check out the measures that have changes made to them, and then check out any measures that you're not currently doing with IRIS. Make sure that IRIS knows that you plan on mapping those measures. You can tell them now. They might not get back to you right away because they're very busy with attestations, but you can tell them. You have to, when you add a measure on IRIS, you have to let them know. So if you do plan on adding that measure, QPP 389, plan versus final refraction, that's a good one to look at for this year. Okay, adding in another outcome measure, which come with 2 bonus points. So good measure to look at. For promoting interoperability, it's basically the same. The measure requirements remain the same. You've still got the same measures listed here. I won't go through them. The sending health information is the outbound measure, receiving and incorporating is the inbound. It's still worth 25% of your score. The category scoring itself remains the same, meaning the measures are all still worth the same amount of points. ERX is worth 10, provide patient electronic access is worth 40. Sending and receiving health information are each worth 20. Public health or clinical data registry is worth 10. Security risk analysis is not worth any points, but it is still a requirement. You still have to do it. You can update the one that you did last year if you want to. That's absolutely fine. Make sure that the requirements are met, though. I see a lot of security risk analyses that are just sort of like slapped together at the end of the year. It's not going to cut it when you get audited, okay? Hopefully you don't get audited, but if you do, you're going to have a list of people who have access to patient medical records at your practice, a list of equipment that contains it, a list of business agreements. You don't necessarily have to include the business agreements in the security risk analysis, although you should have them on file. But a listing of all businesses that you associate with and have access to your medical records, eye care leaders included, lawyers, accountants, consultants, managed IT groups, billing services, all those kinds of things you have to think about, including equipment, right? Heidelberg and Epic and all those other guys that come into the office and have access to your database. They have to be on there too. And then you get into the actual analysis of the health of your network. I usually tell people to let that part be done by your IT department because they know what's going on in that section. But if that falls on your shoulders, there is a really good tool that you can use on the healthit.gov website. You go to healthit.gov and search for security risk analysis or SRA tool. You'll come up with a free tool that you can use. What it lacks in payment, meaning it's cheap, it's free, it does make up for in time. It does cost a lot of time. There's something like 256 questions. Don't wait until the last quarter. Start now and get it done, right? So that you can get that off your plate. It always takes so much longer than you think. Improvement activities are still worth 15% of your MIPS score. There is now a 50% participation requirement, meaning that if you have 3 doctors or more, you have to have half of your providers involved in the measure. And then improvements, so for Provide 24/7 Access, that is a super popular measure. There's a lot of misinformation around it. Improvements have to be made to your after hours or urgent care in order for you to use this measure. You cannot just have the same process in place year after year after year for patients to contact you after hours and then expect to be able to report this measure over and over and over again. If you've already done it once, you can't do it again unless you make improvements to the process, okay? Period. End of story. Doesn't matter what IRIS says, that's the deal. The alternative visit types can be used for this measure as well, though. In the age of COVID-19, we've got alternative visit types popping up all over the place. If you're one of those offices that's implementing telehealth or any kind of alternative visit types, that can include by phone, e-visits, alternative locations. If you've got doctors going into nursing homes or hospitals to meet patients, probably not likely. In their own homes to visit patients, again, probably not super likely. But any of those kinds of visits, you don't necessarily have to bill them in order to use this as an improvement activity. You can have phone visits as long as you have documentation that you gave those services, even if you're doing them for free. Just make sure that you have documentation, you have a report that you can run that says that you provided those services for at least 90 days. Be able to print that report out and keep it in your documentation, your audit folder. I like people to keep an audit folder. so that you can take that out and have it ready. If you are billing these services, then you're probably billing these services as place of service 2, which is telehealth or telemedicine. If you're doing that, then your EHR, your PM, excuse me, can extract that information. So if you're doing a place of service, or even better, if you're doing a different appointment type, you can run reports based on those appointment types or the place of service on your claims to get a really easy, quick list of all the services that you provided. But even if you're not billing them, even if you're no charging them, you can still get credit for this measure as long as you're providing those services. You have to have notation in your charts. You have to have it somewhere, you know, wherever you normally keep charts, even if it's just a note, even if you're not opening up an encounter, somewhere you've got to have some documentation that this service took place. So I think that kind of goes without saying. For cost, it's still worth 15% of your overall MIPS score. The measures remain mostly the same, although there are 10 new measures, episodic measures, but none of them are ophthalmic. So there's no new ophthalmic episodic measures, or on the horizon even. There's none sort of on the table right now. No submission is required. This is completely done through claims-based reporting. You don't do anything. You just bill your cataract surgeries as normal, and then they attribute the cost. So they're going to calculate the cost of a cataract surgery from start to finish, from eval to final post-op, and add up all those costs together per doctor, or excuse me, per patient per eye, regardless of provider at the office. And then they'll come up with an average cost for cataract surgery at your practice, or per your TIN, right, per group that reports. And then they're going to plot that on a line with everybody else's average cost for cataract surgery. And if you fall smack dab in the middle of that line, you're going to get 7.5 points out of 15. If you're perfect and your costs are the lowest, then you'll get all 15 points. If your costs are super high, then you may get 1 or 2 points. So it just kind of depends on where you guys fall on that line with everybody else. Cost is attributed to the surgeon only. So even if you're co-managing, the co-managing claims that come out for cataract surgery count. Now, they're being billed as post-ops with modifiers 5.4 and 5.5 or whatever. So the cost is probably, you know, negligible in that situation, but cost is attributed to the surgeon only. So any cost associated with the cataract surgery, even post-ops happening or taking place in a different office with a different provider, still count toward the surgeon, okay? And optometrists or other ophthalmologists who did not perform the surgery do not get that cost associated to them, even if they're billing the post-ops. All right, so that completes the categories. If you're interested in how to set up your RCP dashboard from inside of an iCare Leaders EHR, so iMedicWare does not have access to this report, but all the other iCare Leaders EHRs do have access to this regulatory compliance platform. It's different for every EMR, so you know, you'll have to ask your support staff at iCare Leaders how to get to it, but once you're there, you land on this page. And if you get there and it looks like this with no practice information, then that means you need to set it up. It's got to be set up once per year. You have to put in your practice information. So over here on the side, we've got a little icon that looks like a gear. This is your settings or your configurations drop down. If you hover over this and click on practice information, that's the first step. You come to this page here. So you've got your performance year already set up to 2020, so you don't have to worry about that. If you are reporting as a group, which is the preferred method, if you have more than one provider on a tax ID, group reporting is, generally speaking, the best option. There are very few situations in which you would want to report individually, and that's only if, you know, one doctor is doing super terrible and the other doctor can do better without the other one's dragging him down. And then in that particular situation, I would still report everyone as a group and then report that really extra high performing doctor as an individual, because if you have two attestations, a group and an individual, the individual one, whichever one's higher, will be taken by CMS. So it doesn't matter which one is better. the higher score will always be taken. So, but anyway, if you have a tax ID with more than one provider on it, you set up as a group. If you have a tax ID with only one provider on it, you set it up as an individual. You're going to type in your group name here. Doesn't matter what you put there. You can put whatever kind of nickname you want to, or initials, or it doesn't matter. This is just for us. And then you put your tax ID in here, and then any attributes. This is going to be something like healthcare professional shortage area, rural area, if you're part of an APM, those kinds of things. You can find most of that information if you go to qpp.cms.gov and look up your provider's participation status. You can click on the button in the MIPS tab, and it says participation status. You click on that, type in the NPI, and it'll give you all of your attributes, so you can check the correct ones. But even if you're not sure, just leave it blank, and you can still set it up. And then you'll just choose from your providers here. So if you want to check them all, you just check the box at the top. If you want to pick and choose, or you have multiple tax IDs, you need to set them up separately. So choose your providers that have the same tax ID listed. If you're missing a provider, or you're missing a provider with a tax ID combo, like he's under one tax ID, but he's not listed under the other one, and he bills under both, then you need to contact support to fix that issue. Don't set it up because it'll be incorrect. So select your providers by tax ID, and then once you're done doing that, you press the orange button. All of this deletes itself out, and you can start over and add a second one if you've got multiple tax IDs. If you've only got one tax ID, you only need to do this step once. If you've got multiple, you need to do this step and put in all your tax IDs and create all your groups. Press the orange button. When you're done creating all of those, this is the save button. It does not say save. You're going to forget to press it. Try not to. This is the circle button with a check mark up here in the upper right. That is your save button. There's a save button on almost every single screen, especially in configurations. Do not leave a configuration screen without saving, okay? The circle with the X is the cancel button. It takes away everything you just did. So unless you want to start over, don't press that button. And then, of course, you can print this too, although it's not very necessary to print configuration screens. Once we're done doing that, we're going to go back over to our gear. And this time we're going to choose promoting interoperability, or PI configurations, PI configurations. This one's a little bit more complex. There's 2 pages to this. This is the upper section. So we've got our 2020 performance year. If you put in a group, choose group. If you put in an individual, choose individual. And then choose your reporting entity from this list. This is the group name that you chose from the last step. You can leave the measure set alone. Mine is an older print screen, so it says 2019 objectives, but it now says 2019-2020 PI objectives. Choose your reporting period. I generally just do 90 days. There's no reason to do more. Typically, there's no reason statistically to open it up, but sometimes if you add in a few more days or something, you're trying to capture something, you can add in a few more days. You can do a date range as long as it's over 90 days. Anything between 90 days and a full year you can do. You can do 123 days if you want to. It doesn't matter. And it can start on any day of the year up until October 2nd, because that is or October 3rd, that's the first day of a 90-day reporting period. So it can start anywhere from January 1st through October 3rd. And then when you get into this section, you're going to be putting in your performance goals. These are what I like to set things up as. These are pretty normal ones. You can do the exact same thing and copy this, with the exception of exclusions. You can exclude out of any measure that has a checkbox. If you're not sure if you can exclude, don't exclude. And then just put 100. It's pretty safe in there. And then that'll make sure that you get a perfect score. But these are fairly normal ones. This would not get me a perfect score, just FYI. This would get a perfect score. This would get a perfect score. These points would move into this one. This one at 96% would not get me a perfect score. You would have to be 100 across the board, except for this one. This one can be 95 because it's only worth 10 points. So 95 would round up to 100% on this, and then you'd get the full 10 points. But the other measures would have to be 100 in order for you to get a perfect score. Almost nobody gets a perfect score anymore. So your providers will need to start to let that go. They've made this category very difficult starting last year, so just FYI. but this is fairly normal. This will get you a really reasonable score, 24.5-ish, right here. If you scroll down on that page, this is the next section that you come to. You're going to set up your 2 clinical data public health reporting measures. I like to set it up like this. If you're an ophthalmologist who's using IRIS registry, I like to exclude out of immunization and exclude there with the exclusion option number 1, which is that you don't provide immunizations. If you're an ophthalmologist, this is pretty standard. If you're an optometrist and you don't have a registry, then you would pick something else and exclude here too, or some other kind of specialty that doesn't have a registry. Just choose whatever, syndromic surveillance. Nobody's state is going to allow a subspecialist or specialist to be involved in syndromic surveillance, electronic case reporting, or immunization registry. Just FYI, there is no state available that does that. Ohio and Virginia were the last 2, and they quit doing it this year. They claim that they can do it, but they, you know, we've tried, and they're not really ready. So then the next part that you would want to do, and this next one is optional. At this point, once you go back up to the top of your screen and save these, you'll get a save message, and then you can either go to your dashboard, which is this sort of clock or egg timery icon, or you can continue and put in your improvement activities. So if you want to put in your improvement activities, you just come in here in the drop down and choose that. And then again, group, reporting entity, whatever your reporting period is. Like I mentioned, you can have 2 different reporting periods for your measures. Just make sure that the date that you start the first one is the day that you do your from as a date range, and then the day that you stop the last one is the last day of your reporting period. So this one here is a little weird. It's 179 days, but it works. As long as I've got documentation, they don't overlap at all, really. There's there's 2 dead days in between those 2 activities, but that's still fine. This would be acceptable. So again, you would want to save that information. And then when I'm done setting everything up, I'm just going to press this button, come back here. If yours already looks like this, you can skip the setup process because it's either already been done for you or you've already done it. So if you see your group listed here with a date, mine's missing dates, then you can just click right on your score, your PI score. It does not calculate until you put in your security risk analysis. I forgot to tell you where that is. Underneath your public health reporting, there's a place where you can put in your security risk analysis. That's where you put that date in. So you save that. So if you've got a security risk analysis and a date range listed, then you would have a score here. It would be calculating a score. You click on your score, and that brings you to your report. Okay? If you're doing MIPS, this is the report you go to. If you're doing Medicaid attestation, this icon is the report you go to. Okay? So just pay attention to that. So this one's a 2019 report just because it's what I had on hand, but this is essentially what it looks like. It hasn't really changed since 2020. So you've got your all your measures listed here, whatever your performance rate is. This is your actual performance rate. If you're within 10% of your goal, then it's yellow. If you're over 10% of your goal away from your goal, then it's red. If you're hitting your goal, if you're achieving your goal, then you're green. Okay. If you are wanting to check on the patients that you didn't meet, say we want to check and see which, this is 6 out of 7, who did we not meet this measure on, you can click on the 6 and that'll give you a report it automatically shows you the anti-numerator report, which is all the patients that did not meet the measure. So clicking on that 6 would bring up the report. I just didn't because it was a live client. I didn't want to put patient information on here. Okay, so that's how you set up the RCP dashboard. I'm not a saleswoman. I don't like to make a lot of sales, but I am obligated to tell you that I work for MIPS Assurance, and it is a service that you can add on to your ECL services. And if you don't have time to deal with MIPS, or your office manager has too much on their plate, and there's just nobody around, and you can't afford to hire another part-time employee, MIPS Assurance is cheaper than hiring a part-time employee to deal with MIPS. So if you are struggling or you need somebody to take care of it and take it away from you and just take the weight off your shoulders, check all your numbers with you every month, make sure that you're meeting the requirements and that you know what all this stuff is. I had this presentation individually with all of my clients. In fact, there's a couple of them on here. They're probably gone by now. And I had this same exact talk with them individually earlier in this week. When I had the information, I let them know what it was. So if you want this kind of thing every month, and we run your reports, and we set up all your things, and we set all of your goals, then MIPS Assurance might be for you. You can contact your sales department, or you can, if you're not sure who your salesperson is, you can contact your support person for your EHR. All right, that is it. So any questions? If you guys still have questions, go ahead and type them in now. And then Courtney, I think there's some questions probably already.
There are, yeah. So I just first want to let everyone know about the next webinar that we have scheduled. You can also always find our scheduled webinars on the iCare Leaders website. The next webinar we have scheduled will go over MyCare telemedicine, and this is going to take place this coming Tuesday on April 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Now Megan has wrapped up the webinar, we will move on to the questions. So one of the first questions, Megan, was, should an attestation be taken back if the score was negative? Only be taken back if the score was negative?
Yeah, if your score was negative, then go ahead and take it back. If you attested through IRIS and you know you didn't meet the 30 points, okay, so keep in mind, you still have cost out there. Cost is not associated with your score right now. So if you've attested to IRIS or the QPP website, right now you're getting an estimated score that is without cost. Cost is worth 15 points. So if you're close, like 28 points or something like that, the goal is to get 30 or more. If you're close at like 28, you can probably let it slide because you'll probably get enough cost points that you'll make that up, those few points. But if you're pretty far away, I would say like 23 points or less, and that's kind of maybe even a little sketchy, 25 points or less, I would say, yeah, go ahead and take out your submission. If you attested through IRIS, then you'll have to contact IRIS to remove the submission. If you attested through the QPP website, that's way easier. All you have to do is go there and remove any information you already typed in. And that as long as it's a blank on April 30th, you won't be assessed for anything.
Good. And I know we kind of touched on this, but will implementing telehealth count as an improvement activity?
It certainly does. It counts as the 24/7 access measure. It is a high priority measure. So if you're a small practice, that would be the only measure you'd have to do. If you're a large practice, again, 16 or more providers, then you would have to do at least one other high priority activity or two other medium weight activities to get the full points from the category. But yeah, you can certainly use telemedicine for improvement activities. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. When going over the security risk analysis, there was the health IT website you gave. Was it healthit.gov or what was that URL?
Yeah, it is it's healthit.gov.
Okay, perfect.
And if you just, yeah, you can literally just Google health IT and then SRA tool. Just Google that and that'll get you there probably.
If CMS...
And then when you get there, when you get to that website, it's got a whole bunch of information about the security risk analysis there too. So if you're confused about it at all, it will actually have resources for you to look at, but it also has the tool as well, plus a user guide.
Perfect, thank you. If CMS gave a last-minute exemption due to COVID-19, can we assume that they will offer the same exemption for this year?
It's hard to say. It kind of depends. We're very early in the year, so I would say it's very likely that they'll probably do the same thing, especially if things get worse. And experts are saying that it's probably going to get worse. So if that happens, I think it's very likely, but I can't say for sure, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it just depends. It depends, I guess.
We have an MD Office user that asked how to create the reporting entity in the RCP module.
So if you're an MD Office user, you're going to be going to your admin dropdown in MD Office and choosing the MIPS macro dashboard option. And then that opens up into this page, right? and then you're just going to follow the directions from there. So start over in the settings and then go through your practice information that gets you to this page, and then go into, once you're done saving that information, then go into your Pi configurations, and that gets you to this page. And then if you set up just this top half, you can get away with getting your numbers from there.
Great, thank you. So someone asked if they could get a copy of the ESA recommendation for completing the security risk assessment, or if you can get a recording of this meeting. Yes, this recording, like I said, will be saved and uploaded to our website next week. So if you go to the iCare Leaders website, you can look at all prior recorded webinars. So that will be uploaded sometime next week so that you can reference this again. Absolutely. What is the website to print the CMS published clinical notes?
Published clinical notes, the release notes that I spoke about, maybe. The release notes, you can find all of the resources for, I think it was this. CMS published the 2020 clinical quality measures specifications release notes. You can find all of those resources on qpp.cms.gov. There's a resources section in the upper right-hand corner. But if you take this specific phrase, the 2020 clinical quality measures in parentheses CQM specifications release notes, and Google that, it'll probably be quicker. I literally copied and pasted this from the document. So but it's out there, and that's what it's called. So Google that. But any resources that you want are on the qpp.cms.gov website. Tons and tons of resources. You can filter them by 2020 or 2019 if you're looking for something from the past. So really nice resource, really good website.
Great. An integrity user asked if they have access to this dashboard. Yes, you absolutely do. And if you need assistance with figuring out how to access the dashboard, you can send in a ticket or call the support line, and they can walk you through how to access it from your integrity site.
Yeah, in integrity, I just happen to know, but in integrity, it's above your logout button. When you're on your main, what is it, the personal dashboard or something like that? When you're on your main page, above the logout button in the second column, it's the last thing. It's called RCP dashboard. And you may need rights to that. So if you don't see it, it's because you don't have rights to it. So then you'll have to contact support.
Right, and that can be done under user management, or if you're not an administrator, your practice administrator can do that as well. Let's see. What website do we go to see our cost score slash analysis?
Same website. It's going to be QPP, like Quality Payment Program, .cms.gov. When you go to that website, you don't have to have a login ID to see the resources or to check your provider's eligibility or find your attributes. But all of those things can be done from that website without your user ID and password. But in the upper right-hand corner, there is a section for sign in. You need a HARP ID, H-A-R-P, like the instrument. So you'll have to set up a HARP ID first. Okay, you can go to the HARP website to set that up. Again, just Google HARP ID. It's usually the first thing that pops up. Google is your friend. MIPS stuff is really easy to Google. But anyway, you would go to the HARP website to create an ID, or QualityNet or something, .gov, I think is what it is. Create your HARP ID, and then you can use that to log into the qpp.cms.gov website. Anything dealing with specific provider scores or the ability to attest, because you can do it there too, you have to have a HARP ID in order to do that. And if you go to qpp.cms.gov and you are just completely confused and utterly lost when you get there, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page. There is a dark navy blue section that has a phone number. If you call that phone number, You usually get an answer within 5 to 10 minutes. I've never waited longer than 7, I think. So they've got a bunch of people on the line and ready to go to help you out with any kind of sign-in issues, or if you're looking for a particular resource, or if you're looking for a particular functionality of the page. Those people are really knowledgeable and pretty helpful, which is not always the case with government stuff. But yeah.
Perfect. We have quite a few more questions, so we'll try to get through them as quickly as we can. How are telemedicine calls affected for MIPS?
How are telemedicine calls what?
Affected for MIPS. I guess how is it
okay.
affected by
Okay. So that's kind of a loaded question. It's got a lot of different variations on the answer. So telemedicine has changed because of COVID, not necessarily because of MIPS. But like CMS wasn't going to pay for certain services, and now they're saying, yes, we will pay for certain services, and notation requirements have become more lenient in the age of COVID. So there's been a lot of changes to telemedicine because of the COVID situation, trying to make it easier and more accessible for more providers to provide those types of services. So I would say contact CMS about that. Talk to those people about the telemedicine requirements and notations and things. But as far as MIPS is concerned, the improvement activity, 24/7 access is really the takeaway for the MIPS side of things. Those alternative visits have always been available to use as an improvement activity, but it was sort of an unattractive measure because nobody really wanted to do that. And it's particularly difficult for ophthalmology because if you can't do a slit lamp or a fundus, what are you doing? A lot of those things require seeing the patient literally face to face, more face to face than any other specialty. So, but now in the age of COVID, it's becoming more prevalent, especially in our particular realm of medicine. So that is a measure that has become more popular. So I hope that answered your question. But yeah, there are plenty of differences out there for telemedicine. Just in the past week, things have changed. So definitely take a look at CMS and talk to a CMS representative about what the requirements are, what the notation requirements are for billing and things like that, because those things have definitely changed.
Great. Would you consider 36.01 out of 45 a safe score?
Yeah, for sure. That's going to avoid the negative penalty. That's just your quality score. So that's just one category of your total MIPS score. We've also got promoting interoperability. What's that score? Did you run a report out of your EHR? The RCP dashboard is on most EHRs if you're not using a platform that has it. Again, iCare Leaders, iMedicWare has their own report, but other than that, if you have an iCare Leaders product, you have RCP. iMedicWare has their own report. It's under reports, under compliance. And then I think it's still called ACI 2019, but either way, you just run your report and enter your PI data, right? I'm assuming you've got IRIS, but if not, you go to the QPP website and put that in. That's up to 25 more points, right? And then did you do an improvement activity last year? If you did an improvement activity, that could be up to 15 more points as well. So the score that you just gave me is decent. It avoids the negative penalty, but it's only your quality score, right? So there's other categories, your promoting interoperability category and your improvement activity category. I would urge you to look into those, specifically PI, because if you weren't paying attention, you probably didn't do the improvement activity, but your promoting interoperability category, you probably sent e-prescriptions, you probably sent information to the patient portal. Those types of things, information getting sent to the patient portal typically happens automatically in iCare Leaders products. So by accident, you have to have at least 12 points there. So I would encourage you to run a report and see if you've got any loose change in the couch cushions over on your PI reports.
Earlier in the presentation, it was mentioned that MIPS won't take into account Q1 or Q2 data in quality. If we do really well, can we voluntarily include that?
At this point, there's no voluntary submission of the Q1, Q2 data, although it was just a blurb that came out in a newsletter, really rapid fire, kind of in the beginning of this whole mess. So that might change later on if people want to. I would say let's not bank on it, let's not count on it. And the other thing that I would say there too, just to anybody is pay attention to your quality measures, because now we've only got 6 months instead of an entire year. That shouldn't change things, but if you're a provider that has, generally has a lower patient denominator, pay attention to measures that dip below 20 patients, because again, you don't get the full value for your performance rate if you dip below 20 patients. But yeah, no, I wouldn't bank on it. I wouldn't bank on being able to opt in to submit that information. It's probably going to be all or nothing, although things could change. So we'll see.
Is this replacing the IRIS dashboard?
You would use IRIS dashboard for quality, and you use your RCP dashboard for the promoting interoperability category. They are two functionally different dashboards. They are, the one from the EHR is extracting information from the EHR for the promoting interoperability category. IRIS is extracting a different set of information for the quality measure. So no, you would use them both. You need to have them both.
Great. And then again, we kind of touched on this, but it was, how do we receive MIPS credit for certain measures that require dilation and fundus examination with telemedicine?
Right. So that's going to be interesting, to say the least. And it's also probably part of the reason why Q1 and Q2 data is not going to be used or relevant for 2020. That's a really, really good question, and I wish I knew the answer to it already, but I think unfortunately it's going to have to unravel as time goes on. But you're absolutely right. With telemedicine, we cannot dilate the patient. We don't have access to that. But if we see an ARMD patient and we don't notate, the macular findings, then we don't get credit for the measure. But I think that is why quality information is not being calculated for Q1 and Q2, because that's where those measures are. All of the measures that require dilation are in that quality category. So that sort of takes care of itself, at least for the first 2 quarters. And then if it continues, we'll see what happens to the second 2 quarters, or the last 2 quarters rather.
Great, thank you. It looks like one of just the last submissions was in regards to having an issue with stuff saving. If you're having an issue with information not saving and whatnot, just reach out to your support team and we can absolutely look into that and investigate that on our end.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for your time. Oh, anyone have anything else? Let me check one more time. Nope, it looks like that was the last question that was submitted. So thank you everyone for your time today. Just a reminder that we will have this webinar posted online by next week so that you can download it whenever you'd like. And thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.